All right, welcome everyone. This is the first part of the deep dive into sociocracy. This is a 12-hour course in 6 parts, so it's 2 hours per lecturer, I suppose. And I'm really excited to present this to you today. I want to take a few minutes to just land here in our bodies, here in this moment. So if you just want to take a moment, maybe relax your eyes or close your eyes and just take a few deep breaths. Check in with where you're at right now. Check in with your body. Just landing, doing anything you can to bring your full awareness to this moment, giving yourself the spaciousness to learn, receive, and participate. And recognizing that governance and power dynamics can be really tender, very sensitive topics that can bring up a lot of nervous system dysregulation. So paying attention to how you feel right now as you're breathing these deeper breaths and reminding yourself that you can always come back to this place if you start to feel that dysregulation. And as you feel finished with your check-in, you can open your eyes, return to the group space. Thanks for doing that with me. All right, I will start the presentation here. All right, so you're in the right place. This is the Sociocracy Deep Dive, and we're going to move into a little popcorn of what's your inspiration for being here. So I know that a lot of you have posted about your projects in the chat, and that's really wonderful, but I'm curious, what about sociocracy is really interesting to you and makes you want to be here and to learn about this and to dedicate this time? So I'll just take a couple popcorn shares if you want to raise a hand, and yeah, we'll go from there. So what's your inspiration? What really made you want to show up today? Yeah, Alan.
I wanted to show up today because at Cosmos Co-op, we are practicing sociocracy. We've had three different people with different sessions. And so we're familiar and it's really clumsy. And, building the foundation of a collective co-op of artists and thinkers and futurists is challenging. And the more we can have a format that works well for meetings, for council, for governance, the better. So I was excited. I signed up for the first time you did this and I wasn't able to make it. So I signed up again and I'm here. So thank you so much for doing this.
Amazing. Thank you for that vulnerability. Yeah, it is tricky. It is a whole culture shift. It is a whole mindset change, and it really requires that we all show up in our full participation and self-leadership. So it's a big shift. And so thank you for holding that space and for coming to the course. Any other folks want to share their inspiration for being here? Pamela?
Similarly to what Alan was saying, and further, it's even though I'm not here with the other people that I work with, I'm hoping that I can learn better how to communicate the importance of learning how to talk differently about have different kinds of meetings where people learn how to talk and listen to each other better, and have in place structural supports to help that communication flow more easily, and for both better relationships as well as more effective meetings and outcomes from meetings. All of that stuff I feel is a real strong potential here.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm really interested and excited about the different experiments of, introducing little pieces of sociocracy and how that can help to open up the greater whole of what this framework is and how it can be helpful for groups. So I'm very curious to see how that process goes with you and your group. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Any other folks want to share their inspiration for being here? Dave?
Thanks. Yeah, as I like trying to, I guess, organize bioregionally here in my area and like making connections with people, I certainly see the need of, that's working so far as an individual, but as stuff grows, how do we go from like your individual relationships to a more structured thing? And so, definitely a need for a more formalized system. So, very curious to learn more about it and how that can transition to something like sociocracy.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, I do find that sometimes it is easiest to start with sociocracy from the beginning. So for organizations that are just forming, having some of those principles and agreeing to that way of being up front can be easier than later transitioning out of an old system. So both are totally valid approaches, but it can be easier when you're already trying to figure out what is this thing we're trying to do to implement new culture at that moment. So yeah. And yeah, Faye.
There we go. Sorry, I had to unmute. Well, Rick Watkins was my inspiration person in the group. He did gather one, two, three, four of us, and so that we can collectively work and support one another as we look at revisioning what governance looks like within a church community. And an aging church community. So I'm grateful for that and excited
Awesome.
about this.
Very cool. Yeah, I've actually been aware of several faith communities that have implemented sociocracy very successfully. So I'm very excited to see how that emerges for you. So thank you for being here. Any last burning shares about your inspiration for being here? Yeah, Rick?
Well, Faye already mentioned part of why I'm here. I took the course last year. I really feel like it's going to be good to review and practice more because it takes a while to integrate these thoughts into your system. So that's why I'm here.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely been good for me as I've been learning to review and to work through it and to teach it because that's one of the ways that I learn is also through sharing it with others. So thank you for being part of that. Okay, so I'm going to move into some of you know me, some of you don't know me. So who am I? My name is Andra Vltavín. I use they, them pronouns. I've been training with Sociocracy for All to be a sociocracy consultant for people who are implementing sociocracy, as well as a sociocracy trainer for people who would like to learn more. I've already been a certified sociocracy facilitator for about a year. And prior to that, existed as a board member for Lost Valley Educational Center as their board treasurer, if that was a sociocratic organization. And then I've helped several smaller organizations implement sociocracy. And I've been working with clients, with some practice clients through my certification training. So this is the last course that I need to teach for my certification. So thank you for being part of this experiment and for helping me with that process. And I'm really excited to start into that as a professional career after this moment. So thank you for being here. And then, yeah, so Sociocracy for All is the place that's training me. So that's a lot of where this information is coming from. It is one of, I believe, three really big sociocracy training organizations. They are running sociocratically behind the scenes, which is really cool to see in kind of like a big picture global organization way. And they collaborate closely with the International Certifying Board of Sociocracy as well. So some of the slides that you'll see are from them. Some of the videos that you'll see are from them. The whole course itself I designed, but I did use a lot of their information. So, and it's very much open source information that they allowed me to use. So just a little bit about that. And I will likely reference some additional courses if you want to dive deeper, you want more practice. They have some role play facilitation training that you can take through Sociocracy for All that I did, and it was really, really good for helping me build my facilitation skills specifically, is that's kind of there's one thing to understand how sociocracy works, and it's another thing to really facilitate a meeting. And so it helps to get that kind of practice. And we'll do a little bit of that practice here as we move through. So then I do want to share a little bit about how the course will work. So as I mentioned, it's 6 parts. So we'll have 2 hour parts. We'll have 10-minute breaks halfway through, so you can tend to your body as you need to. Please do take care of yourself. So if you need to step away for whatever reason, these are recorded and you can come back as needed. So please do take care of yourself and your body. And you can add questions to the chat as we go. I have built-in moments in the presentation to receive questions so I can kind of catch up, or you can hold them until that moment when I ask for questions. And this is a very high participation course. I think to get the most out of it is it helps to be really present in the content, and it helps to participate in the content and feel it in your body yourself. So I've designed this to include some role play, some Google slide editing with groups and breakouts. There's polls, there's short videos, and there's fish bowls where a subset of us will practice something while other folks watch. So in that mode, it will help if you're on a laptop rather than on a phone, just because of the high participation mode. And if you're on a phone today, that's okay. We don't actually have a breakout today. We have a fishbowl today, so it should be fairly easy if you are on your phone right now. But just going forward, it might help with your participation if you are able to join on a laptop or a desktop. Sessions are recorded, but the breakout groups are not. So that's another benefit of coming live, is that you'll be able to actually participate in the breakout rooms, but the report backs from the breakout rooms will be in the recording. So if you have to miss a session, you'll be able to hear about the experience, at least, of how that went. And you could even do the exercises in a small group outside of the course if you feel like you've missed out. I want to make a clarification that training in sociocracy, learning about sociocracy, is not the same as implementing sociocracy. So implementing sociocracy is a big process, especially for an existing organization. And often they need some outside support to really think through all of the things that need to be customized to make sociocracy function in an existing organization. So training is sort of the first step toward implementing sociocracy in an organization, but it's not a full implementation. So I just want to get clarity on some of the languaging there, so there's not confusion. And then in general, please practice confidentiality, self-care, and mutual respect in this space. People might be sharing some vulnerable things about what's going on in their organization right now. And so the best way is to just hold that with confidentiality. And if you feel a need to talk about that or feel a desire to talk about that outside of this course, then making sure that you're anonymizing that content, and so that it's not reflecting poorly on that organization or the individual sharing that information. So just practicing that kind of self-care, mutual respect, confidentiality as we move through. And then a little bit about how this course is laid out. So part 1, which is today, we will talk about how to reinvigorate your meetings, because I don't know if you realize this, but organizations and any kind of group work, it's a lot of meetings. So how do we have meetings be effective and fun? So we're going to spend a lot of time about that. We're going to talk about what is governance. We're going to talk about what is consent in an organizational context. We'll explore kind of a poll to explore consent, and then we'll role play a meeting in a fishbowl setting. So that's what we'll do today. Next week, we will talk more about decisions and roles, like how decisions actually get made, how roles work in sociocracy, and do some role play about a role selection process. And then part 3 on August 19th, we'll explore more about the culture and the alignment. So talking about vision, mission, aims, and domains, which are a little bit different in sociocracy than in other more traditional governance styles, and just talk about what is needed to create this new culture that we're moving into, and then do a deep dive and a role play on how to integrate objections, because making sure that we are all brave as we're entering conflict spaces is really necessary when we're doing decentralized governance and everyone is making decisions and needs that feedback to make better decisions going forward. The second half of the class, we will start on August 26th. with upkeep and growth. So we'll mostly be focusing on organizations that are fairly small and maybe doing single circle sociocracy, but I also want to talk about what it looks like to grow from that point, how to have multiple linking circles, and how to do performance reviews. We'll do role play in that as well, and talk about how the roles change in a multi-circle organization. And then we'll add a little bit more complexity in part 5. We'll talk about department circles and subcircles, different types of circles, so communities of practice and helping circles. And we will do some practice in designing our own circle structure in a theoretical organization. So you get some practice in what does it look like to actually design a circle structure? Or it's kind of the equivalent of designing an org chart, but it's more specific to how to actually set up these circles and how to cluster the types of work that the organization is doing rather than have this top-down hierarchical chart. And then part 6, we'll do some pro tips and kind of explore different pitfalls of implementing sociocracy. It's explore different power dynamics, explore where you can go from here in terms of getting your facilitator certification if that's something that you want. And then kind of think through like, okay, this is a big framework. Do we really need to use every piece of sociocracy? And I'll kind of take you through what happens if you choose not to use certain pieces and possible alternatives. So that's the course outline, just so you know what's coming. And I want to stop and see if there's any questions and concerns about any of that, anything that you'd like to share about the outline. How's it feel in your body? Excited? Nervous? Any other comments? Okay. Seeing nodding, I'm seeing thumbs up, seeing some interest. Okay, and so yeah, it sounds like there's excitement. And so, yeah, I want to recognize too that you've all shown up here. You're all deciding to be here. You have control of your time. And so if at any point this stops being valuable, you can stop coming. You are in your full participation, and you lead with your feet, so you can walk away if you need to. But also, I really value feedback. And so if at any point you're like, hey, something about this isn't working for me, I would really love to weave you in and be inclusive about how we can facilitate your learning. So please, send me a chat message, or feel free to speak up about that, or you can send me a private message through the design school, and I will work to make this work for you and find that range of tolerance for everybody in this learning environment. So, okay, with that, we will move forward. Okay, so diving now into the actual course content. Share my screen again. So first I want to talk about what is governance. Like that's a big word, can mean a lot of things. We might think about like the government at large, our state government, or our federal government, national government, and often in this context, we're talking about the ways that we make decisions within groups. So my favorite definition of governance is steering. So it's how we steer the organization. And my mentor, Ted Rao, has talked a lot about when an organization gets together, they get together to change some aspect of reality. They wouldn't necessarily be getting together if everything was fine and dandy, or if, there was something that they didn't want to change. There's something that like, hey, I really think that this group can come together to make this change in the world. And so when we think about, okay, we're making a change and we're doing this with others, how do we make decisions? How do we decide which decisions are ratified? Who makes those decisions? And how do we review those decisions and improve over time? And that is what I mean when I talk about governance. So it's that who decides idea. That's what we're talking about today. And so I just want to take a moment to check in with our bodies again, and just maybe think about a moment when you were in a group space and a decision was being made and you really did not feel heard in the ways that this decision making was happening. Your voice did not come into the space in the way that you wanted, and it was a real struggle. And just take a moment to be brave and vulnerable in your body and just feel into the sensation of what that felt like in that moment when you just did not feel heard, you did not feel like you were able to speak and have a meaningful impact on that decision-making process. Let's take a moment. And as you feel ready, as you identify whatever that sensation is in your body or whatever that emotion is that you're experiencing, maybe drop in the chat. How does that feel? How does it feel when you do not feel heard? You do not feel like you were a part of that decision-making process. For me, in my body, I feel this tension in my midline, this like, ooh, this clenching on the inside. I'm seeing frustration, constriction, more shallow breathing. Yeah, this all makes a lot of sense. Tight in my stomach. Yeah, tightness, tension, tight jaw. So you can see, we can feel it in our bodies when there's something not right about the decision-making process, or when we just don't feel included. There's this constriction in us. And it seems like there's some overlap in the ways that we experience that too, which is really interesting. So yeah, thank you for exploring that. I know it's sometimes uncomfortable to bring uncomfortable feelings into our body, but it's important to feel the full spectrum of what's possible in this. And so I want to also take a moment. You can close your eyes or keep them open as feels good to you, but feel into your body about a moment when you did feel heard, when your voice did have an impact, and when the decision felt really aligned and collaborative. Maybe there was a moment recently in a meeting with your group or in the past where it just all felt really aligned and you felt inspired and you felt like you participated in a meaningful way. You held a role in that space. How does that feel in your body? You can drop that one into the chat as you're feeling it, yeah, okay. So I'm seeing deeper breath, more accepting of others, engaged, enlivened, open, exciting, feeling lighter, rush of tingles. Oh, that's good. Invigorated, enlivening, warm and light, tingly excitement, several tingles. Love the tingles. That's great. Yeah, there's this like openness, there's a rush, there's a feeling of like, wow, I feel expanded, right? So it's really interesting. We've got this like constriction, this expansion, and there was again a lot of overlap in what that physical sensation was. And so we're really seeking in sociocracy and in really any kind of peer governance style to create that sense of expansion and that sense of participation in meetings, in the decision-making process, and in participation in the organization as a whole. It's interesting, and I'll talk more about this later, but there's in the Occupy movement, to like demonstrate agreement, they would do like these fingers up twinkles, I think is what they call them. And when I heard the tingling, I was like, oh, it's like I agree. That's fun. So that was good. I like that association. Okay, so now we understand what we want. We want this sense of expansion. We want this sense of participation, but how do we actually do that? And what does it look like in practice? And so I'm going to share my screen again. Oh, there we go. Okay, so why collaborative governance? You get more engagement from others on your team. It's more clear how people can participate, and so there's more participation. It can result in less burnout, although even in sociocracy, imbalances can occur. So there's always a feedback process and a review process to make sure that things are balanced. But in general, you do typically get more engagement because everyone really does need to participate in the decision-making process. We're moving away from power over over structures. So in sociocracy, we talk about power with. So we're sharing power, we're empowering others, we're meeting people where they're at, and we're not kind of coming down from this top-down power over structure. We're making informed decisions with the people on the ground who are actually doing the work. So in sociocracy, we are moving the decision process and as much into the fingers of the organization, if you will, as possible, so that those decisions can be made by the people closest to the people who are doing the work. So that's part of what it is. And then we want to leave meetings feeling that sense of expansion, sense of energized and effective, so that we can keep the momentum of this organization moving, because it's not a sprint, it's a marathon oftentimes in these organizational contexts. And then it's also because we have found that majority rules voting fosters this long-term divisiveness. If you live in the US or another very politicized country, then you might notice that there's these two-party systems that polarize and they pull apart. And so when there's majority voting, there's a minority group that is unhappy, that doesn't feel heard, that is struggling and doesn't have a way to meaningfully participate. And so sociocracy and decentralized governance is an attempt at not creating this majority-minority dynamic, but actually bringing out that participation among all people in the group. I also like to say, no matter the mission, we need healthy groups in order to complete it. So it kind of doesn't matter what it is you want to accomplish. It's rare that you can accomplish it all by yourself. And so that means we need to have healthy groups, we need to have healthy group dynamics, and we need to know how to work together well in order to do the work in the world that we want to do. So that's kind of, for me, the most foundational step is, how do we have health in these organizations? How do we prevent them from dissolving and disintegrating and entering into conflict processes that never resolve? And so for me, sociocracy is the most fundamental piece, or collaborative governance in general has to come first before we can really make the change that we want to see in the world. And then I like this slide a lot. It talks about the different governance systems that exist. And some of these you're probably really familiar with. Some of them you're maybe less familiar with. So I'll go through these a little bit quickly, and I did post a link to the slides in the design school in case you wanted to follow along or reference them later, so you can do more of a deep dive into this if you're interested in that. But to start, we have the concept of autocracy. So that's often how many corporate businesses run. There's sort of your executive leadership, your CEO maybe, or the board that's making decisions at the top level, and then it kind of trickles down to the people doing work on the ground. And the people doing work on the ground don't have a lot of say in why they're doing the work, or what work they do, or how they do the work. And so there can be a lot of lack of feedback, lack of participation in that design process, and a lot of frustration on the ground. There's more constriction in this process. Some of the strengths of that, though, I think it's important to acknowledge that some of the strengths are you can make really fast decisions, because often the power is held by very few people, or maybe just one person. They can just decide and do it. And so that can be very fast. And I have seen that in sociocracy, there are ways to make fast decisions. And so I'm excited to show you some of those, because I do think there is this idea that peer governance is a lot slower than other styles of governance. And I do think there's a learning curve. But once you get into the learning curve, then there's ways to implement that kind of more fast decision-making process. So democracy, I think a lot of us are very familiar with this. So some nonprofit boards, some cooperatives, obviously many governments run this way. So it's by voting and authorities. So it's often representational. So there's a lot of people who are voting for a few, and then that person has power to make decisions. And this works for really big groups of people. It's easy to scale. But again, we run into the situation where you have a majority rules situation. There's people who don't feel heard. The representatives who have been elected maybe don't actually represent the needs of the people. They can have biases that are difficult to see before they get elected. And there's not really a feedback process other than like the future election, right? So that can cause a lot of tension in that governance style. You can have no governance system or anarchy. And this is where the purpose of the group is maybe a little loose or unclear. The who makes decisions is a little bit unclear, and that there's a lot of flexibility. And there's a lot of groups that operate anarchistically, which is, I think there's this concept of anarchy as like, oh, there's just no rules at all. But oftentimes the rules are just really informal. They're very kind of like culture based. They're not written down anywhere, but there's a way that you're supposed to act. So it can be really difficult for new people to join because there's not a lot of clarity in, okay, well, it seems like everyone's following a set of rules, but it's not clear what those are, and they're not good at communicating them, and I don't know who's in charge and what's going on. So there's a lot of difficulty in like expanding an anarchistic organization. But I have seen kind of hybrid models work really well in, say, like mutual aid groups, where they say things like, well, we have a couple rules, like you need at least 3 people to make a decision. Okay. All right. That's just standard practice there. And then there's certain things of like, okay, we make sure that nobody gets stuck with all of the stuff to cart home. You know, we all kind of come together at the end and make sure that we divvy up the supplies at the end, so there's no one stuck with more supplies than they can fit in their car. So there's a couple rules, and then otherwise, like the organization operates kind of anarchistically. So I've seen this work, but it can create difficulty, and you have a lot of implicit types of power that can come in and be confusing for people. And the people who have the loudest voices are often the ones that are making these decisions. And then it is hard to change the culture later because there's just no foundation to stand on. So that can be really difficult. You may have heard of whole group consensus governance structures. So sometimes cooperatives or nonprofit boards, also people's groups, citizen groups are often consensus based. And this consensus means that every person must agree on a decision. So there's a possibility that someone will say, I don't agree with this decision, and then we need to kind of start over and reintegrate what the ideas are. But there's a high focus on everyone being heard in that sort of an environment. There's a lot of different ideas that people can bring to the table. But it can create situations where you have, maybe 20 people and one person doesn't like an idea, and so the group cannot move forward. And I have seen some modes of modified consensus where you have like, okay, hold up a number of fingers if you agree. So maybe 5 is full agreement, 4 is a little less agreement, 3 is a little less agreement. And if anyone is less than 2, then it's not consensus. So I've seen that that's a way to prevent like a full block, and to give people a little more agency, give the organization a little more agency in the decision making. But it's still very hard to hear 20 people's voices in the same room all at once and to try to make efficient decisions. And so I haven't seen this work very well. I've attended some people's assemblies, and I do think that the informal power, the implicit power of the facilitators does come in and affect the decision-making process. And there's not often a lot of structure for onboarding new members into this new process. And so someone brand new can come in and object to something, and they don't have the investment in the group, but they're still able to block decisions. And so that can be really difficult. And then there's sociocracy, which is my background. And so I have a bias here that I do think that this is a very efficient mode of governance, but we're practicing consent rather than consensus. And I'll talk about the difference a little bit more in a minute. But so we're thinking about who has consent power in the circle, and what do we do when there's an objection? How do we integrate that objection? And the objections are based on, I really think that this is counterproductive to our goal as a circle, rather than I just don't like this. So there's something different there with the organizational consent, which I'll talk about more later. And then instead of inviting the entire organization into every single decision that gets made, we have these subcircles. And these subcircles are largely independent. They make their own decisions. They're subsets, they're small. You might only have 4 to 8 people in these individual circles. And so it's a lot easier to hear everybody's voice. And then the people who are most interested in that topic are the people in the room. And so they're going to participate and give their feedback on particular proposals and decisions in a way that really helps to facilitate efficiency, but also really hearing people and providing feedback on the proposals that are being made. The challenge to that is it is a lot of training. People really need to know how it works. You need to have more than one person who's your sociocracy expert in the group. Really, everyone needs some training. And ideally, the people who are facilitating need even more training. And then you might even need a little bit of outside help to say, like, are we implementing this correctly? Are we doing this well? And there's an ongoing need for training and onboarding of new people and making sure that they know how sociocracy works so that it doesn't degrade over time. And I would argue that that's true of every good governance structure, that some re-education needs to occur. And I think that we don't often do that in our organizations, even the autocratic organizations or the democratic organizations. There's not really that re-education. There's like, maybe you learn some things in school and then we hope you remember it for decades. But I do think that that re-education does help with the commitment to any kind of governance structure, and sociocracy is no exception. So, okay, I'm going to move through this. And actually, I think I maybe will just stop and see if there's any questions right here. And then we can move on to kind of digging more into sociocracy specifically and consent. But any questions so far about the difference between different governance structures or your experience in those? What's coming up for you? Dave.
Yeah. So locally here, I've been in contact and attended trainings, different activities with Co-op Dayton. And so I've heard all sorts of different terms, and I'm trying to learn how they work and associated organizations. So I hear people's assemblies come up quite a bit. And I noticed you mentioned that is generally in your experience. And so you mentioned like those were kind of or maybe are consensus based. I've never attended one, so I don't know. So were you saying that they're either all or mostly consensus based? Is that
The,
correct? Or?
the ones I have attended are. I think that
Okay.
each People's Assembly is going to operate a little bit differently. But yeah, the ones that I have attended have been consensus oriented. And often the sort of like the Occupy movement was also very consensus oriented. And there are others that have been consensus oriented. But that doesn't mean they have to be. I think People's Assemblies are really specific to their location and their local culture. So it really depends on who's starting them because they are very independent and very grassroots. Yeah. Sophia,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you. Sophia, did you have a comment?
Yeah, a big bell went off when you described democracy. And because so much of the politics that I've been associated with have been saying, we have to fight for democracy. We're trying to save democracy. And yet I'm realizing that polarization is not resolved yet in democracy. And so it's like with sociocracy, we're taking some steps back and starting over again, which explains why maybe it'll be more of a grassroots uprising of consciousness rather than a political this or that. So it just somehow really struck me as reframing democracy differently. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that in. I get asked a lot about, can we do this at the city level or the state level or the national level? And I feel like there are probably ways to do it, but I do think that the way that we have right now, this representational governance, where at least where I live in Portland, there's 650,000 people who are being represented by 12 people in the city. There's just no real feedback processes, and the loudest voices are the ones that get heard. And so it's for me, I start to think about maybe that's too big. maybe that's too big. Maybe we do need to break it up by neighborhood, by street, by, and really get to that smaller level and really see if we can participate in group spaces together on that really small level that nests out bigger. So yeah, I think that that's a really interesting thing. And I think it might be called Dunbar's number. Maybe don't quote me on that, but it's like the largest group possible where everyone knows each other. And I think it's something like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like 150 to 250. And so really thinking about like, what if our organizations shouldn't be bigger than that? What does that look like? What does that look like in governance? What does that look like in democratic situations or, as we approach sociocracy, like what is that? Thank you, Dave. I was hoping somebody would post a link to it. Yeah, it's really fascinating information. So, yeah, thank you for bringing that in. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, we'll keep going. All right, so what is sociocracy? So in terms of how we're going to define this word, the word socio means those who associate together, so those who are social together, and then ocracy is governed. So those who associate together govern together. So it's really, for me, I like to call it peer governance or decentralized governance because sociocracy is one of those lingo terms that nobody really knows what you're talking about unless they have some exposure to it. So, but really it just comes down to peer governance. And so there's three pillars of sociocracy that are really important, and everything that we do in this framework comes back to one of these three pillars. So one of the pillars is consent. We aren't seeking perfect agreement from everyone. This isn't consensus, but we do want group decisions to be within everyone's range of tolerance. Because if someone is consistently outside of their range of tolerance, they're going to eventually want to leave that organization. So then the second pillar is transparency. We want clear communication among all team members and work groups, and we want to share information. So this is that breaking down of silos. I noticed that someone posted in the discussion board about how people don't share information. There's all of these silos and there's not clarity around what people are working on. And sociocracy is trying to break down those barriers and allow for that really the circulatory system of the organization. If we think of the organization as a body, how is the information flowing? And oftentimes in sort of like the top-down hierarchical modes, that circulatory system only moves toward one point. It's not circling back. So we're trying to create that circulatory system through transparency. And then feedback. So we have review processes at the end of meetings, during feedback periods, and on regular intervals to help maintain everyone's shared reality. So over time, we're co-creating a narrative. We're co-creating a narrative of change and a change model. And if we are not constantly telling that story, we're going to stop operating inside of that story. And if multiple people are operating in different stories in your organization, conflict and tension can occur. And so in the feedback processes, we're making sure that we're continually co-creating that narrative together, and we're constantly adapting. Humans are a very adaptive species, and so their governance practices should be able to adapt with them and change to the situation. So sociocracy is very flexible. It's very customizable to particular cultures and particular organizational styles and organizational needs. And that feedback process is in place so that you are constantly reevaluating, is this working for us? And how do we change it if it isn't? And so I really love that about sociocracy. And I have a hard time with any meeting that I'm attending that doesn't have a feedback moment at the end where we can say like, oh, wow, I feel really constricted in my body, or I feel really expanded in my body. So that has been a game changer for me. And then there's this motto in sociocracy, is it good enough for now and safe enough to try? We really want to encourage experimentation because as you're trying to change reality, you have to experiment and you have to accept the results and you have to use those results as feedback. So we're thinking about, is this good enough for now? Is this safe enough to try rather than, is this perfect? And I've heard the quote, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And so there's this idea of we need to move forward. We do need to accept feedback and we need to make sure that it's in everyone's range of tolerance, but we want to continue to experiment as a group. So those are the pillars of sociocracy. Just a little bit of history for us. This was inspired by the Quaker Council traditions. It developed out of a student-led school in the Netherlands. Gerard Edinburgh specifically went to that school and was just very fascinated, and he brought sort of his engineering background into that student-led school and that process and created sociocracy out of that. And now sociocracy is practiced around the globe, especially in co-housing and intentional communities. And I want to add faith communities to that. There actually are quite a few faith communities that are now using sociocracy, but it is becoming more widely adopted for activist groups and nonprofits, which I'm really excited about because I don't understand why our nonprofit change-centric groups are being run like corporate models. I just don't understand that at all. So that's really my passion, is how can we move the nonprofit space out of this corporate top-down, sometimes I call it zombie capitalism mode. Because there's not like this evil CEO at the top, but you're still like hustling for grants and things. Okay, and then as promised, just want to talk a little bit more about what consent is in an organization. So I think we know what it is in our bodies. Like, does my body want this? Does my body not want this? It's a little bit more complex in an organizational setting because you're consenting kind of on behalf of the circle. So if you imagine that, okay, I am a part of this larger body, this larger circle, and I'm really trying to, from my perspective, see if the circle is consenting to this. And so I'm thinking about what is my preference in this decision and what is my range of tolerance, and those are different. So we'll go through an exercise that kind of demonstrates the difference between range of tolerance and preference. But preference is your like absolute first choice. That's what I want the most. And your range of tolerance is, yeah, I don't like this decision exactly, but I don't feel like it's going to cause the circle any harm or prevent us from meeting our overall goals. So that's really what it means to object, is saying, I think this might actually harm our goals. I think this might actually inhibit the way that we're moving forward together and what we've agreed on together and what our policies are and our mission is. Like this decision might really have consequences. Also, I want to say that an objection can just be, I don't have enough information to make a decision. And that's a really important objection to bring in. And I really like to say that objections are gifts because it can be scary to object. And especially in the Pacific Northwest culture, I've found that a lot of people are very conflict averse and they're very afraid of speaking their mind. And so objections are a gift, but we also want to be mindful about like, how can we communicate that this is either I don't have enough information or I really think that this might harm our circle's goals right now. And, or, hey, I don't know that we've thought about this. Can we at least think about this together so that I can feel more comfortable and this can be moved into my range of tolerance? And that's the process of integrating an objection. How do we help move this decision into everyone's range of tolerance? So yes, so in a group, consent is going to be the overlapping range of tolerance within a circle. So the darkest parts are like, this is what everyone's shared preference is. This is like everyone's favorite decision and where that might overlap. But the bigger gray area that overlaps is that range of tolerance. So there's a lot more room to make decisions when we're operating from that range of tolerance than from the personal preference. And so that's just kind of an idea. And anything outside of that shaded triangle in the lighter gray triangle, or I guess it's a diamond in the middle, would be an objection for somebody. It might not be an objection for you, but it might be an objection for somebody else in the circle. And so what can we do to bring that proposal or that decision back into everyone's shared range of tolerance? So we're going to do a little practice so you can kind of see how this feels, and hopefully this won't make you too hungry, but if it does, then we have a 10-minute break and you can grab a snack. But we're going to think about, okay, if we were going to decide as a group, all of us, what's for lunch? I, for the sake of time, gave us 3 options. So our 3 options are a gluten-free spaghetti bar with optional toppings, ham, turkey, or hummus sandwiches, and burritos and burrito bowls. So I'm going to send you a poll through Zoom, and you'll have an opportunity to say, this is my preference, this is my first choice, this is in my range of tolerance, I would eat this, but it's not my favorite, or I object, I don't have enough information about this, or I would not eat this. So, we'll practice this together. So let me send you that poll and we'll see how this goes. All right, you should have it now. So there's 3 questions. We'll say you'll pick one for your preference. And an objection is I will not eat this, or I don't have enough information to say whether or not I could eat this. So just see that how that is feeling for you. And give folks a minute or two to finish up.
I only made one. Were there 3?
Yeah, there are 3.
Ouch. See if I can get back there.
You'll only be able to select one though.
Oh, one in each. Yeah, there's 3 questions.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
it
didn't
closed
scroll.
Oh,
when
I
okay.
closed after my first question.
Okay.
mine too.
All right. Let's try and do it again then here. Okay, so there are 3 questions. Yeah, I'll relaunch it. So you'll have to respond again, but this way everyone can participate. So 3 questions, and hopefully you've already thought about it, so it will be pretty quick.
I have a curiosity.
Yeah,
I noticed that I could do yes for 2 different ones or all 3, and I was curious why there wasn't a ranking or something also.
that's a good question, and I will talk about that, I think at the end.
Okay.
Yeah, I think when I would just only allow you to choose one, but the functionality of the polls over Zoom is only so good. For one thing. But yeah, we can talk about ranked choice voting after this, because that's really interesting. Okay, looks like almost everybody has finished. So I think I might go ahead and end the poll. All right, let's see what happened. Okay, so I'm going to share the results with you. So it looks like we have, so just thinking about, okay, so the people who wanted yes for spaghetti is only 11%, right? So that's a first choice for only 11% people. But for range of tolerance, that was 67%. So this is a good example of how much more space you can get when you're asking about range of tolerance rather than preference. And then similarly with the ham, turkey, and hummus sandwiches, we've got 22 and 44, so that's less of a difference there. We've got more objections with ham and turkey or hummus, so that's good information. And then kind of this actually exactly the same on burrito bowls. So at this point, if I were bringing a proposal to a sociocratic circle about the lunch that I was going to provide to everyone, then I would listen to the people who have objections, listen to why they wouldn't eat this food, and see if we can add something or change the proposal to some degree to make sure that they have something to eat so we can all eat together for lunch. So that's a little bit of how range of tolerance and consent works. And I want to also just take a little bit of a moment to ask what still feels fuzzy about consent or range of tolerance to you. Is there any questions that you have about that? Because it's a really important concept in sociocracy. So I want to just give some space to unpacking that for you. If anything still feels a little bit like I don't understand the difference between consent and range of tolerance, or the practice of it. And we'll see some examples about how it looks in practice, but just in terms of like conceptually, if there's any questions. And I also want to say, I say objections are gifts, questions are also gifts, because it's probably on more than just your mind. So feel free to bring it in. Pamela.
I'm just wondering about scale, like what seems to be the limit to which this form works most effectively?
Yeah, so I will talk about this as we get into kind of single circle sociocracy versus multi-circle sociocracy. But each individual circle, I've really only seen it work from about 4 to 8 people. So you can have lots of circles. I mean, kind of infinite circles as long as you really have those good nested structures. But individually, when you're practicing consent and thinking about integrating objections and things, and like specifically who's all in the meeting together, 4 to 8 people is like a pretty ideal number for the circle so that you're hearing from every voice. And Faye, did you have a question?
I did, just real quick. Is it fair to say, when I've thought of range of tolerance in some group decision making, is it fair to say that, okay, to be in the range of tolerance, it's something that you can support as a group member and sort of give that responsibility of, you may not, it's not your preference, but will you support this if we move forward with it? Is that fair?
That's it's one way you could think about it. I have seen situations where someone will say, I'm not going to object to this, but I'm not going to put energy toward it. And so that's some data. They're maybe not like, I'm not going to stop this from happening, but I'm not going to put my own energy into, I don't want to be on the team that makes this happen. So that's a totally valid thing. So that might not be for that person's support exactly, but they're not going to stop it from happening. So that's kind of how I think about it. But if it's easier to think about it as like, who will support this, especially if it requires that everyone does put work into it, then that can make sense. But there are situations where you can say, well, these 2 people are going to go do this. You don't have to do anything. Can you let that happen? And letting it happen is a little different than supporting it directly, if that makes sense.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Cool. Yeah, I want to circle back to ranking and ranked choice voting. My partner actually worked on the math for star voting, which is a particular type of ranked choice voting. And I think that really works well in a larger scale, that it doesn't allow for that individual voice or like the reasoning behind the ranked choice. And so I do think for sociocratic circles, it is better to really hear from every voice. But there are a lot of feedback processes where you do need to maybe poll the whole organization. You might want to do kind of more ranked voting to get feedback on particular decisions from the whole group. So there is, I think, still a place for that within sociocracy. But yeah, for this particular poll, I did not have that functionality. So yeah, thanks for bringing that in. Any other questions before we head to our break? Okay. Well, we are going to break exactly on time, so I'll see you back here at 9:40, and I hope that you enjoy a snack or some body care. See you soon. And we've got a few more slides for you, and then we will watch a little video, a short video, and then we'll do our fishbowl role play, and then we'll be done for the day. So back into the presentation. Okay, so we've talked about lots of conceptual ideas and they sound really great, consent and transparency and feedback, but how do we start? How does this actually work in practice? So let's talk about that. So what do we need before we start a sociocratic organization? So ideally you'd have a group of 4 or more people. I've seen it done with 3, but it can be a little tricky. There's a lot of implicit power dynamics in a group of 3 that can be difficult to navigate with sociocracy, but I've seen it happen. People who want to do something together. We are coming together, we're forming this group, like I said, to change some aspect of reality. If we're not on the same page about what we want to do, this is going to cause conflict long term. So when people want to do something together and they know what that thing is and they agree on what that thing is, that's important. And then willingness to experiment for a defined period of time. So let's try this out. Let's see how it works. Let's adapt over time. Let's review it over time. And, we're going to have some longevity together. It's very difficult to do sociocracy in groups that are not long-term. Because there's not that culture built up around that thing. So if you have a really short-term project, maybe sociocracy isn't the best fit. And there are times when sociocracy isn't a good fit for an organization. But just knowing you have a group of ideally 3, 4 or more people. You all want to do something together and you're willing to experiment for a defined period of time. Like, let's give this a shot for 6 months or a year or 2 years and see and review how we feel after that. Also, before we move forward, shared governance, shared power, power with is very difficult if you all don't have shared values, specifically around collective decision making and empowerment. So we're really sharing power. This is not the founder still gets more power than everybody else. This is not the executive director has more power than everybody else. This is genuinely distributed power, and that can be very uncomfortable for some people. So if you're trying to implement sociocracy in a group, and there's people who are really resistant to that who are currently holding power, this might not work in this situation. And there are a lot of ways to mitigate the fears that come up around, well, I founded this and I don't want it to dissolve and I don't want to not have a say. There's ways to kind of unpack those fears and create roles and policies around them that allow for a continued distribution of power. But it takes the people who are currently in power really being willing to work toward relinquishing it or at least minimizing their own power so that it is shared among all of the people in the organization. So that's kind of the first thing. You have to be on board with that. And that's a big shift for a lot of people. There's a commitment to process. So we're going to talk it out. If there's a problem, we're going to discuss it. We're going to give each other feedback. We're here with the growth mindset. We are all evolving. We are all flawed, but we are all evolving at the same time. And so we're going to be working on ourselves, and everyone is going to be working together in this group. And we as a group are going to be working on adapting and changing over time. So we are in that growth mindset. And then a respect for diverse perspectives. When you are hearing from every voice in a circle, you're going to run into more disagreements. And that's good because those disagreements exist, and it's better that they are transparent and that they are above board than they're simmering under the surface and you don't know about them. So when we're respecting diverse perspectives, we're allowing people to speak in whatever way feels good to them, and really coming from whatever perspective they have and whatever bias they have, and they can help us see our own blind spots. But if you're not having respect for diverse perspectives, or that can be threatening to you, it can be really hard to enter into a space where you're really needing to listen to everyone as we're talking about a decision together. So I would really say that these are the sort of foundational values that you would need before you start into sociocracy. So a lot of the organizations that I work with are pretty small. I would say that most of the decisions are made with a group of 4 to 6 people. And more than that, I would start thinking about adding more circles, because there's people who are going to be more interested in particular aspects of the organization than others. And there's going to be people with more bandwidth than others. And there's just going to be more efficiency in the decision-making process if there's more distribution of power into multiple circles. But I'm going to focus first on single circle organizations so you can see how that works and how it builds out from there. And so I would say at most 10 people in a single circle organization. But again, the conversational rounds and hearing from everyone gets longer and longer the more people you have in the circle. So I've seen it work better with like at 6, I start suggesting that they divide up into multiple circles. So it really depends on the size of your organization, but I'll focus on this single circle version first. This group is focused on one aim and goal. So that could be something like we're going to work on restoring this specific creek. And, we have a project that we're working on, and we need a governance group for this project. We need to make decisions about this. Or, we're hosting a faith community, and what does that look like? And what are all of the practical realities that come along with that? So they're focused on one aim and goal. And then they have facilitated conversations with question and reaction rounds. And I'll talk more about what that looks like, but these are the aspects of a single circle sociocratic organization. And so conversational rounds are, I think, the easiest to notice, like, oh, this organization is at least trying to practice some elements of sociocracy, if you start noticing these conversational rounds. So what happens, and we'll see some examples of this in the video, is a proposal will be offered. Someone will introduce a proposal. They're like, I would like to do this. And then there's a round of questions. So everyone gets an opportunity to ask a question. Everyone gets an opportunity to react to the proposal. So the questions are just, let's get more information. Let's all get on the same page. The reactions can be really personal. Like, I'm not sure I like this. I'm worried about this. I'm worried about that. And then we go into a consent round, which is where you might object. So you might say, I really don't like this proposal, but I'm not going to object. I just needed you to know that I don't like this aspect about it. Or you can object, and then we go into a process where we try to integrate that objection and see if we can change the proposal in a way that moves it into your range of tolerance. So these conversational rounds are designed to discourage tense back and forths. Because I don't know about you, but in meetings where there's two people who are really going at it, that's when I feel the most constriction in my body. And I just have a really hard time feeling like it's possible for me to participate in that space. It gives everyone a chance to speak. Even if they pass, you don't have to speak in a round, but it gives everyone the opportunity to. And it removes the need to raise hands. That can be really fatiguing as a facilitator when everyone's trying to raise their hands at the same time and what's the stack and how to keep track of that. If we just know we're always going in a round, we're always going in the same order, or we're going to go in reverse order this time, then it's really easy. You know who's next. And there's, it reduces some facilitation overhead too. And then it builds a culture of trust that there's time for everyone's input. Like, we will get to you. You are in the round. And so there's not this like urgency to speak, because if I don't speak right now, then I might not be heard. You trust that the round is going to come back around to you. So that's why these conversational rounds work. And I will say that as a facilitator who's facilitated a lot of meetings, this is the number one strategy that I return to if there's tension in a meeting, if we're off track, and like, okay, let's return to the rounds. Let's make sure that we're hearing from every voice and we'll move on. And that helps so much. It is the biggest and best tool in the toolbox. And in those sociocratic organizations that have gotten a little bit lazy about the conversational rounds, they have a really hard time getting people back on track because the people have gotten out of practice of using the rounds. And so the rounds become a less functional tool because they're out of practice of using it. So that's the danger of starting it and then kind of fading away from it and trying to come back to it. So really, really key part of sociocracy for me. So the rounds, I was kind of describing this, but so someone will introduce the proposal. Sometimes it's the facilitator, sometimes it's the person who designed the proposal. And then there's a round of clarifying questions. So we're all talking about the same thing. We know we're all talking about the same way that we're trying to change reality here. And once we've done the questions, then we explore reactions. And I really want to say, reactions can be personal. Like we were talking about how organizational consent is not necessarily your personal preference. The reactions are your personal feelings about it. And it's really important to share what those feelings are, even if that's not going to lead to an objection, because that allows for everyone to have kind of a lay of the land of what the situation around this decision is. So, and sometimes all people really need is to feel heard about what their feelings in their body are, or that they don't really like this, or that, this isn't their first choice. And that's it. And that's all that needs to be said. And we can still move forward and we can still run this experiment because we've still heard from the people who needed to speak. And then we do the consent round. So that's when you would either consent or object, depending on if you have enough information, if you feel good about the decision and you're ready to experiment, if it's safe enough for now and good enough to try. So I don't want to spend too much time on this, but this is a super, super basic agenda for how a sociocratic meeting might run. So you might do your check-ins, your announcements, your action item follow-ups, like most meetings do that. You're consenting to the agenda. So there's an opportunity for everyone to see what proposals are on the table and kind of talk about like, oh, can we switch this order? Or do we really need to talk about this? Or something came up and we need to actually prioritize this decision first. So there's an opportunity for people to give feedback on the agenda at the beginning of the meeting. And then you have 3 different options for what to present. So you can do a report back, which is just like, hey, remember that decision we made? It went into practice. Here's how it worked. Does anyone have questions about that? So that's report backs. It's very simple, just the question round. Exploration is more like, hey, I just need some feedback on this. I'm designing this proposal. It's not quite ready for a consent round, but I could just use some reactions. Like, can we just kind of brainstorm a little bit? So you'll still do a question round, you'll still do a reaction round, but you're not going to do the consent round because you're not deciding on anything. So you're only doing the consent round if you're deciding on things. And then a proposal is, hey, I've really fleshed this out. I really want to introduce this to the group. I'd like to move forward with this. We do a question round, we do a reaction round, we do a consent round where people can object. And then if there are objections, we would integrate those objections, which we'll talk about in the class next week. And you'll do an action item read back and the meeting feedback. So that's just how a basic structure of an agenda would go for a sociocratic meeting. And then we'll see this in practice. I'm going to reshare here before I share this video. It's about, I think it's like 2.5 minutes long. And I have to share the sound differently. So let me do that really quick. Okay, so now you get to see one of these meetings in practice, or one of these proposals in practice.
Okay, next on the agenda is Luciano, and he's got something for us on the learning stipend. Luciano?
Yeah, thank you, Elena. Well, as you know, I'm an advocate of this issue. The present learning stipend is 500. Many people use it, and it's not enough. Many people don't use it, I have to say, but for people who use it, it seems a lot, but it's not. So the proposal is to raise it from 500 to 750, and that's a bit. That's all. That's the proposal.
Thanks, Luciano.
Check.
Was that proposal clear for everybody? Do we have any questions on that? All right, let's do a reaction round then. This time, let's go Lizzie and then Adam, and then I'll go, and then Michael, and we'll all finish with Luciano. Lizzie?
Yeah, I think it's really exciting and useful, and I feel like it will help people find some more valuable courses to help them. Check.
Thanks, Lizzie. Adam, and then I'll go.
Yeah, I mean, like we were talking about it last meeting, the financials look good for it. All the people who weren't using it kind of cover the people who are going to use some extra, so that's great from my end. And I'm looking forward to taking a couple extra courses that I got my eye on. So check.
Great, thanks. Yeah, same. I think it's a good idea. I know we talked about that we've got room in the budget for it, so I think it's great. So check. Michael?
Yeah, thank you for putting this together. I feel like it's really clear and it'll be good for our circle and for the org.
All right, and Luciano?
Yeah, just glad that it went through. Nothing to add. Thank you.
All right, then let's do a consent round, and we'll go same order: Lizzie, Adam, me, Michael, and then Luciano. So Lizzie?
Yep, consent.
Great. Adam?
I consent.
I consent as well. Michael?
I consent.
And Luciano?
Let me think about it. I think I'll consent, yeah.
All right. Well, then it sounds like we'll be good with moving from that 500 to 750 a year.
Okay. So yeah, I'm just curious before we go into our own version of doing that together in real time. What did you notice? What were some things that came up for you as you watched that? What things did you like? What things do you have questions about? How is that maybe different from some of the meetings you've been in? Dave?
Well, it seems like they addressed the main obstacle, which was budget, and everyone was in agreement with that, and so nobody had other obstacles.
Dave?
Yeah, everybody seemed very what the right words to choose here. So I'll just pick like calm and confident and felt secure. Um, and so possibly that was just a certain topic that came up, or just if there was a more divisive one, maybe different. And maybe that depends on a lot of other variables, but that's just my observation.
Yeah, this is definitely they were all in alignment, so it was very easy. We'll definitely focus on more examples next week of when it's not easy and how that works. But I did want to show you like this could be a 2-minute decision, right? This went through. Yay. So it doesn't always have to be this long, arduous process. And I think it's important to show both options. So yeah. Any other things that you notice, things that you want to call in? Questions about how that was facilitated? Rick.
I guess one thing I noticed, they already had an agenda item. They all knew this proposal was going to be made. And it seemed to me that they had already all thought about it because most of them had a comment about why they felt it was good. So I think that's why it's useful to know what's on the agenda before you have a meeting.
Yes, yeah, I think agenda creation is a very very underappreciated task. And getting an agenda out a couple days early, it goes a long way for sure to help people understand what's coming and prepare their thoughts for that. So yeah, Faye.
It was also nice to see that the minutes were visible for everybody as they were being taken and the format of the minutes as well. So
yeah, that's definitely going to change from organization to organization, but I also have found that really valuable as well. So great. And Jeff.
Somebody mentioned that they had talked about that same proposal the previous meeting. So they just didn't have a consent round. They only had a questions round or something at the previous meeting.
I think what they had talked about was they had reviewed the budget at the last meeting, and so that helped them feel confident to make this decision. So sometimes other decisions will feed into, or the report box will feed into the ability for everyone to feel like they can consent to a particular decision.
So maybe a consent round. Last time somebody raised that and needed that clarified before they could go forward, or
yes, that would be a great reason to object if you were like, wait, hang on, I don't know what's in the budget. Do we really have the budget for this? And sometimes the budget is in the purview of a different circle, and so you might have to come back to that after you get some more information. So yeah, that's a really good point to bring up.
I also love the ease of rounds. I really get that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really helpful. And it's funny, I often have to remind myself to include myself in the round when I'm the facilitator. So it was good that she put herself in the middle because I often forget, or it feels awkward to go at the beginning or the end. And so, yeah, that was a nice little strategy there that she had. I often say like, okay, facilitator hat off for a second. Here's my actual reaction. And then, okay, now I'm facilitating again. And it's good to make those distinctions. Pamela.
Yeah, I had the feeling that I was looking at a very mature group, a very maturely developed process and set of people, so that it's like looking at the flower after it's been well planted, well seeded, all of that stuff. And so this is what it can look like, a nice ripe piece of possibilities. Yeah.
I really like that. Yeah.
But I can imagine there was a little bit of work going into getting to that point.
Yes, yeah. And keeping in mind that all of these people are, the organization that's being pictured is Sociocracy for All. So they're all really coming in with that training. And yeah, I mean, we'll talk a lot about how does one develop a culture of this kind of trust. It doesn't happen overnight. So yeah, that's important to note. Okay, well, let's go ahead and move into our own little fishbowl role play. So I'll introduce it and then I'll ask for some volunteers. So maybe start thinking about if you'd like to participate or if you'd like to I'll need about 3 to 4 volunteers. So, okay. Okay, so our fishbowl role play proposal here, I will be the facilitator for it. Just hang on, let me change the way I'm sharing this so I can see your faces. There we go. Okay, so I'll be the person bringing the proposal and the facilitator for the purpose of our practice here. But we're going to talk about improving local water quality by planting native plants at a nearby creek. So I have a proposal to give you with that. I really invite you with these role plays to be imaginative, and you can throw big questions at me. Like our organization is, trying to improve water quality in general. And so this is one way that I think that we could do this as a circle. And so, yeah, so we'll do a questions round, we'll do a reactions round, and we'll do a consent round. So do I have some volunteers who would like to participate in this role play with me? Anybody want to raise their hand, be brave? Dave, okay, great. Pamela and Sophia. Okay, that should be good, I think. Or anyone else like really want to participate? Anyone feel left out about that? Everyone else content to be an observer? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and pin those folks. We've got the, okay, so this is our little fishbowl. And I'm going to stop the share so we can see each other. And I'll go ahead and facilitate. So welcome. Thank you for coming to the meeting. And I'm really excited to share this proposal with you. I've been working with a local nursery in our area, and they're very excited about the restoration that we're taking on with our local creek. And they have offered to donate 100 native plants to our project. And I would really like to accept that and get a group of volunteers together to plant that down at the creek next month. And I want to run that by you all and get some feedback and then seek consent on that process. So I'll do a question round. I'll go Dave, Sophia, and then I'll go, I might have questions about my own proposal, and then Pamela. So we'll start with Dave.
That sounds like a wonderful idea, but my schedule is really packed next month. So I would feel like I would need some more information about like when exactly that's going to happen.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm planning on the planting happening on a weekend day so that most of the volunteers can come. So it would be September 12th. Thank you for that question. Do you have any other questions?
No, not at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, great. And Sophia, do you have any questions?
Yeah, one of my questions is it's wonderful to get these plants in. It's very exciting. But who's going to maintain them and check them and see if they're getting dry or, if they need what they need on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that in. Yeah, so since they are being planted along the creek, there is a substantial water source, and we are planting them in the fall so that they have time to establish their roots before they have to be in the summer heat. So we're hoping that that will help, and they're planted along the creek bed, so there won't be a lot of manual watering. We also have a couple volunteers who are willing to come and do some watering the month after, just to make sure that they get established well.
Thanks.
Yeah, do you have any other questions?
Not now.
Okay. It is my turn, and my question is anyone in this group interested in being part of that volunteer team? Just so that I know who might show up. Okay, Sophia might show up, Pamela might show up. Okay.
Yeah,
All right,
that actually works in my schedule. So yeah, that'd be great.
Great. Okay, that's helpful for me to know. And Pamela, do you have any questions?
So 180 plants are being donated. Is it certain that they actually suit the environment that they're going to be planted in?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, there's 100 plants that are being donated, and they are specifically riparian zone plants. So they should fit along the creek pretty well, and we've mapped out some zones that would be good for them. We have both some shadier spots and some sunny spots. So depending on the plants, we should be able to find the right environment for them along the creek. Yeah, any other questions? Okay.
No, that's it. Thank you.
Great. So I'm going to move into our reaction round or our comment round, and we'll go ahead and go in the same order. So I'll start with Dave.
Yeah, my initial reaction would be, yeah, I think this is a wonderful idea. All for moving ahead with it. I love it.
Great. And Sophia?
It sounds like a good idea. Do we need to bring tools with us if we're volunteering?
That's a good question, and totally okay to ask questions in the comment round if new things come up. But I do have some tools that I can bring down, and I'm inviting the volunteers to bring a couple shovels, so that we have a little extra. But we should have some in case people aren't able to bring tools. So yeah. Any other comments or questions? Okay.
Pretty exciting.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
How did you get the nursery to volunteer these plants? What did you say to them?
Yeah. So I reached out to them and I kind of explained what our group was doing, and they said that they actually they just weren't able to sell particular plants and they were worried about them going to waste. And so they said, you know what, we would really love for you to take care of them. And yeah, it's like kind of at the end of our season, we just did our closeout sale, and it's a really good time for us to get rid of some of our inventory. So yeah, it was kind of just good timing. And yeah, I have a couple friends who work there, so they gave me the tip. So yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for those comments. I don't think I have any comments. I'm excited that there seems to be excitement, and I hope that this will be a good opportunity for our group and our community to come together in a way that is good for the landscape. So I think it'll be a good community building endeavor, as well as help to support biodiversity in the creek zone. So those are my comments, and I'll move over to Pamela for comments and reactions.
Oh, I think it's a wonderful opportunity. I also wonder if it's possible to broadcast out to the larger community that this is taking place, so that they know this activity is actually going on and that there is care going into the creek to increase the possibility that people might want to show up just to cheer it on even.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I would be happy to make a flyer to post around the neighborhood so that we might get some people interested, not only in the event, but also maybe in our restoration efforts in general. So yeah, thanks for bringing that in. That's a really good suggestion. Any other comments or reactions, Pamela?
No, that's it. Thanks.
Okay, beautiful. So we'll go into our consent round. So you can consent or object, and thinking about objections as does this hurt our ability to continue our restoration work on the creek, or does this help our ability to continue restoration work on the creek? So Dave, calling for consent or objection?
I consent.
Okay, thank you. And Sophia?
Consent.
Great. And I also consent. And Pamela?
Consent.
Beautiful. Awesome. Thank you so much. Our policy is approved. Amazing. I'm excited to see you next month at the volunteer party. Awesome. Thank you for participating in that. It's always so fun to get to role play with some new folks. So that's great. I will unpin everybody so we can go back into our session. Beautiful. Okay, so now that we did our fishbowl role play observers, what did you notice? What was interesting to you? Anything new or different from what we saw in the video that you thought was interesting, or how certain things were facilitated? Just any noticings that you have. You can bring it into the group. Rick?
I observed that it was a little more complex situation than last time, and there were plenty of questions. And I thought it was good that people were free to ask questions, both initially with the question round and also in the reaction round. And that gives you a lot of guidance as to how to do what you want to do. So it was good.
Beautiful. Thank you. Okay.
It really emphasizes to me having that proposal or that agenda ahead of time for people who may not be able to think of all of their questions on the spot, and for people to be able to do their homework. So for example, during the role play, I was thinking to myself, okay, it's all great and wonderful, but I found myself wanting to know, okay, are they really native plants? Are they cultivars? What specifically, is there any toxicity for people who may go along? So I started to get analytical about it, and wanted to ask a whole bunch of questions. So having that information ahead of time, key for me.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that in. I think that's really important. And oftentimes proposals don't always come from inside the circle. They sometimes come from outside the circle. They're still part of your organization, but maybe you're proposing to the budget team or you're proposing to the restoration team and so oftentimes if someone's suggesting something for the agenda, the person making the agenda really wants the proposal to be very fleshed out before they bring it to the circle, or otherwise you might end up in these kind of circular moments where it takes a lot more time than you think. So yeah, that can be again, I said that the agenda creation process is undervalued, and that's part of the reason why if you have a really solid fleshed out proposal, then it helps.
Especially if you're looking to find consent for it. If this was just sort of a fleshing it out process, the person wanted to think of ideas or to get from the group ideas that they may not have thought of, and then not do the consent step. I could see that. So
yeah. Thank you for that. There was a comment in the chat about we should start an improv group, and I'm open to it. Like that sounds like fun. So, I have thought about hosting a sociocratic role play group. So, yeah, Deborah, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I thought everyone did a really good job, being that it wasn't prearranged and there were very good, thoughtful questions. I liked Faye's comment about having, or the thought about seeing the agenda ahead of time and having time to think ahead, and be prepared for what was coming. I do still wonder what, both the video and this was all happy things. So how it goes when maybe it's not so happy, what that looks like, or how, I get the part that you're hearing of all the voices, which is great. And the preference thing, I get it, whether you are 100% in agreement or whether you can tolerate, but to actually see something that maybe could be, I won't say contentious, but could be a little bit more challenging to deal with, in my opinion. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. And we're going to spend a whole session on what objections look like, because it is key. We need to have I like to use the term brave space. So we're not afraid of conflict. We're not conflict averse. Objections are a gift. We want to welcome them in. And so I want to spend a lot of time on that, but it is hard to talk about objections before we know how it works without objections. So, but yeah, I'm very excited that you're excited about learning more about that, because I think it's also a really key piece to all of this. So yeah. And yeah, there are proposals that are really contentious. I think, especially in intentional communities, some of them can be really contentious because they're about the way that we're living together, right? So for instance, I've seen pet policies be extremely contentious. Who can have a dog, who cannot have a dog, or how many dogs can you have and why, and who can move in with more dogs, or what's the cap on dogs. Wow, that is I think the number one most contentious policy I've ever encountered in multiple community spaces. So it can be really tricky. Sometimes it's an easy decision, and sometimes it takes a lot of feedback to really make a decision that everyone's happy with. And sometimes you have to revisit those decisions too. So yeah, but that's also going to be every governance structure. And I think the benefit of sociocracy is that we are being transparent and we are revisiting these decisions and these policies so that we can keep tabs on the friction in the group about particular decisions instead of it going underground and causing problems later. So yeah, anything else that anyone noticed about this role play or how it was facilitated? Dave.
I know that this is just an example, but I imagine since this was a decision-making round or section, maybe the previous meeting, there was an exploration. So we would have had some of those questions answered in that. But that's just my thought. I'm making some assumptions here. And then also for something like this, would there necessarily, maybe that's not the way I want to, would there be a project plan kind of fleshed out for people to review, all the steps and that sort of thing?
Yeah, the other favorite phrase in sociocracy is "it depends." So it really depends on what the culture of your group is. So if it's if you don't have many decisions to make, then maybe it's okay that this comes as a proposal and we haven't done an exploration round in a previous meeting because you know what, we're not actually doing that much. So we have spaciousness to really talk through this proposal in a first time. It also might be that, you know, maybe this nursery donated the plants or like needs to donate the plants within a week. So it's a more urgent decision. And so we might not have a fully fleshed out proposal. So sometimes it makes sense to bring in those decisions, even if they're not fully fleshed out, or even if we haven't done an exploration round in the previous meeting. It really just depends. And so kind of having that flexibility in organization to say like, okay, I see that this is urgent. Let's make sure it gets on the agenda. Can you please try in the meantime to get the proposal as fleshed out as possible? So that can be helpful too. So yeah, thanks for bringing that in. And Sophia.
Yeah. One of the things that I noticed is that as you were addressing my questions, I began to see myself more in the role of implementing, you know, of volunteering. Well, if I'm a volunteer, I might need some tools. And that led to other questions. And if the goal is to have people who are going to be on the ground implementing these things, I can see how the process strengthens that.
Yeah, it builds a lot of that culture because these are the people closest to the work, right? These are the people who are most affected by the work in the organization. So yeah.
And I felt enthusiasm growing that might not have. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. Any other comments about how that felt in your body for the people who participated in the role play? Was that like, yeah, what was the experience of that? It felt good. Thumbs up. Okay, cool. Thumbs up from panel. Neat. Cool. Well, thank you for participating in that, running that social experiment. All right, I'm going to close out our lecture with just some key takeaways, and then we'll do questions and feedback, and then we'll be done. So, key takeaways from this session. Oops, let me present it here. Sociocracy is collaborative governance done by peers, so we're practicing power with instead of power over. We're doing conversational rounds, questions, reactions, and consent to support conversational turn-taking and participation. So we've gotten a lot of practice about that today. You've seen how that works in non-contentious situations. And in Sociocracy, the goal is to hold share power. And it's really important to note that this can be really uncomfortable for people at first. A lot of people often are more comfortable with someone else making the decisions, but in Sociocracy, we are really all here to share in that decision-making process. And anyone in the role play could have passed, could have said, I don't have a question, I don't have a comment, and just consented. That would have been okay. But there's this opportunity for participation and kind of a cultural hope that everyone will participate. And certainly, because people participated, now we have a flyer going out to the neighborhood. And that might not have happened if, you know, there hadn't been those questions and those reactions. And then consent on a proposal relates to collective goals and well-being, not personal preference. So talking about organizational level consent rather than individual preferences. And so that's a big takeaway from this session. And I want to open up space for any questions and any feedback about this session and how it went, and any ways that would help you to feel more comfortable in this space or to feel like you can participate more in this space. Just want to open the floor for any just lingering thoughts before we stop sharing time together.
I think something that stood out for me that I never quite got before is that this is a way of finding agreement around a different set of values beyond the personal. I know that's being talked about throughout, but it just occurred to me that that's a real choke point, going beyond making decisions for your personal, this is what I like, or this is what feels good to me, to really identifying the common thing you have in common outside your, or that is a part of, but an extension beyond yourself. Yeah, that's really difficult to communicate at times.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. It's making me very excited. I feel like for me, that sense of expansion in my body that happens in a really positive meeting where I feel heard is that sense of I feel connected to something larger than myself. I feel part of this organizational body. I feel like a meaningful node in this circulatory system. Right. And so, yeah, it does take stepping outside of yourself a little bit and lending your mind to the organizational well-being, to the organizational body, in order to really step into that mode and say, like, okay, I'm speaking on behalf of the organization right now and on behalf of myself. Those things have to go together because my perspective is valuable and unique and everyone needs to hear it, but I am speaking on behalf of the organization. So yeah, that's a really beautiful, nuanced takeaway. Thank you so much for that.
I like how simple you've gotten the slides to be. You know, not too many words, not too much design, because there's so much information that simplicity, I can like not quite, but almost hold it in my mind.
Thank you for that. Yeah, these have gone through quite a few iterations, and some folks are taking this more than once. So that's really good feedback. I spend a lot of time on that. So yeah, and we'll be doing a lot of this practice. So it'll become second nature. It really does. Once you do these conversational rounds, it's just like, oh, why would we do it any other way? And Rick, you had a question or a comment?
Well, related to that one, I really do appreciate the slides, and I really appreciate the fact that this is all recorded and we can access the slides later because it allows me to just focus on what you're saying rather than trying to write down notes as fast as I can. So that's really good. A question is how soon are the recordings going to be available to us normally?
Yeah, I try to do it within 24 hours. So usually it'll be faster. There's a little bit of like processing on YouTube's side of things that I can't always predict, but I really try to get them up as soon as I can. So usually within 24 hours. Thanks for that
Great.
question and the feedback. That's really helpful. Yeah. Okay. Dave?
Yeah. Earlier today, I was thinking to myself, "Oh, I can't wait for sociocracy class," but also it's 2 hours, and even 1.5 hours is like a little bit long. But some feedback for you, both at the break and at the end, when you said it was time for break and time for the end, I'm like, "What, already?" Which tells me, yeah, I'm really enjoying it, having fun. So I wanted to share that with you. And another thought that's come up to me in like creating organizations and thinking about governance is safe spaces and inclusive spaces, and that whole idea. And at this point in time, anyways, like a fully inclusive space is not safe. A fully safe space is not inclusive. But with these principles behind sociocracy, it allows, I know I've heard Anne and Neil talk about this, a safe enough space where people with lots of different views can still come together and we can work together and that sort of thing. So I wanted to share that. And if you have any reflections on that, beyond that, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that. Yeah, so I often talk about instead of safe spaces, brave spaces, so that there are, there is willingness to enter into conflict with care and with thought. And sociocracy doesn't have built-in conflict mediation processes, but they do really recommend that you have them in place before conflict occurs, because it's very hard to agree on a conflict mediation strategy in the middle of a conflict. But yeah, I mean, sometimes there are going to be personality incompatibilities. You're going to realize, oh, we all in this organization have a value of community, but we didn't realize, we got 6 months down the road and we realized that we each define community differently. And so now what do we do? And so there's going to be times where that comes up and that inclusivity becomes really difficult. And I think when it comes to accessibility, I think there's a lot of importance of like really hearing out what do people need in order to participate. Like that's really, really important. And that's one way that I try to be inclusive in the spaces that I facilitate. But in terms of inclusivity, I think about the paradox of tolerance. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, but there's this idea that if you're tolerant of intolerance, then everything's going to dissolve, right? So that you actually have to be intolerant of intolerance in order to be a brave space, a safe space. And so yeah, there's some really interesting articles about the paradox of tolerance. Maybe I will post them in the discussion board for a deep dive if you're curious about that. But yeah, it's something that I've been thinking a lot, and especially activist spaces. Like there's going to be certain values that your group holds that are antithetical to including everybody. Like if you don't want, for instance, if you're creating a sociocratic organization and someone wants to hold all the power, that's not inclusive, right? That you can't, as a sociocratic organization, it's directly incompatible with someone holding all the power. And so there are things that you are necessarily excluding in that way, and you have to decide as a group what those are. And I think that makes sense. That is part of running an organization. And my mentor talks a lot about creating an organization as sort of like when there's an ocean and then you create sort of like a safe space to kayak inside of. You're still kayaking in the ocean, but you're kayaking in a selection of the ocean that kind of has a wave break. And so there's a place to practice before you're interfacing with the ocean directly, right? And building an organization, especially at the beginning, is a lot like that. You're creating that safe, sort of simulated reality almost. It's not completely inclusive of everything in the ocean because you're not ready for the waves yet, right? And so you're kind of building out from that place of practice. So yeah, that's a big conversation, and I'm really glad you brought that in. And I'll post some resources in the discussion board about paradox of tolerance because I think it's really interesting. Any other questions or feedback for our session today? Anything that would help you participate better in the future or feel more included? Okay, I think I'm going to call it then. Thank you so much for being here. This is a joy to facilitate, and it's really exciting to talk about and see so many people who are interested in this and interested in the ways that they're going to go out and change reality. I always love hearing what people go out and do with this from here. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.